Have you ever noticed that we don't really talk anymore? Margaret asked one quiet evening, her voice calm, but carrying a weight Daniel Carter immediately recognized. The question had come out of nowhere, or at least that was how it felt in the moment. Daniel had been standing at the kitchen sink rinsing a coffee mug, the warm water running over his hands while the late afternoon sun stretched across the floor in long golden lines. For a second he didn't answer. He simply stood there, staring at the swirling water disappearing down the drain. Behind him, Margaret sat at the small round table by the window, slowly folding a dish towel that had already been folded once before. Daniel finally turned around and gave a small shrug, the kind people use when they want a conversation to stay light. "What do you mean?" he asked. Margaret looked at him for a moment, as if deciding whether she should continue. Then she smiled faintly, though the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "I mean exactly what I said," she replied gently. "We live in the same house. We eat dinner together. It feels like we stopped really talking years ago." Daniel leaned back against the counter and crossed his arms loosely, trying to appear relaxed even though something in his chest tightened. The kitchen clock ticked loudly on the wall above the stove. "We talk," he said after a moment. "Every day." Margaret nodded slowly. "Yes," she agreed. "We talk about groceries. We talk about bills. We talk about what time Ethan's baseball practice starts." She paused and looked out the window toward the quiet street. "But that's not the same thing." Daniel didn't answer right away. He knew exactly what she meant, but admitting it felt dangerous somehow. Because once certain truths were spoken out loud, they couldn't easily be pushed back into silence. The truth was that Margaret wasn't wrong. Over the years their conversations had slowly shifted from the kind that connected two people to the kind that simply kept the household running. It hadn't happened because either of them wanted it that way. Life had simply filled every empty space with responsibility until Ethan was young. The house had always been full of activity. There were school schedules taped to the refrigerator door, grocery lists written in thick black marker, and stacks of homework spread across the dining table. Daniel spent most of his days at the repair shop, fixing washing machines, refrigerators, and air conditioners for people across the city. The shop kept him busy from sunrise to sunset, and by the time he returned home most evenings he felt too tired for long conversations. Margaret had her own routine. She volunteered at the library 3 days a week and managed nearly everything inside the house. She knew exactly when the trash needed to go out, when Ethan's science project was due, and when the car needed an oil change. They worked like a well-organized team. From the outside, their life looked steady and reliable. But somewhere along the way the quiet distance between them began to grow. Daniel noticed it in small moments. Sometimes he would walk into the living room after dinner and find Margaret sitting in her favorite armchair reading a book. How his day had been. Daniel always answered the same way. "It was good," he'd say. "Busy." Margaret would nod and return to her book. The exchange lasted less than 10 seconds. Neither of them meant for it to end there, but somehow it always did. Other nights they sat together on the couch watching television. A comedy show would make Margaret laugh softly, and Daniel would smile too. But even in those moments he sometimes felt as if he were watching the scene from a distance rather than living inside it. The feeling confused him at first. Margaret had done nothing wrong. She was still the same thoughtful, patient woman he had married years earlier. She still remembered his favorite meals and left small notes on the kitchen counter when he had a difficult week at work. Yet Daniel could never forget the truth he had hidden all those years ago. That secret had quietly reshaped the way he interacted with her. Every time their conversations drifted toward the past, especially the months around Ethan's birth, Daniel instinctively redirected them. He would ask about some chore that needed attention. Margaret noticed these patterns even if she didn't fully understand them. One evening during Ethan's final year of high school, she mentioned a memory from the hospital. "When Ethan was born. Do you remember how nervous you were in the hallway?" she said with a small laugh, while setting plates on the table. Daniel's hand froze for a split second as he reached for a fork. "Yeah," he replied quickly. "I remember." Margaret smiled. "You kept pacing back and forth like you were about to run a marathon." Daniel forced a chuckle and nodded. But the conversation ended there. He couldn't bring himself to say anything more about that night. Moments like that happened more often as time passed. Margaret began to sense that certain topics made Daniel uncomfortable. She didn't push him about it, but the awareness created an invisible boundary between them. Eventually both of them learned to stay within safe conversations. They talked about weather forecasts, work schedules, neighbors moving in and out of the neighborhood. Those topics were easy. The ones that once filled long evenings when they were younger became rare. Daniel sometimes thought about the early years of their marriage, when they would stay up late talking about dreams for the future. They had imagined traveling across the country one day, maybe driving from Ohio all the way to California just to see the Pacific Ocean. They had talked about the kind of parents they hoped to be and the kind of home they wanted to create. Those conversations had once felt endless. Now they seemed like distant memories from another lifetime. The change didn't happen all at once. It unfolded slowly, like pages turning in a long book. 1 year passed, then another. Ethan graduated high school and left for college nearly 300 miles away. The house suddenly felt larger and quieter. Margaret tried to stay positive about the transition, but Daniel noticed how often she paused outside Ethan's empty bedroom. One evening a few weeks after Ethan left, Margaret prepared dinner for just the two of them. She set the table the same way she always had, in light. Daniel sat down and looked around the room. Without Ethan's voice filling the space, the silence felt heavier than usual. They ate slowly, exchanging a few polite comments about the day. Halfway through the meal, Margaret set her fork down and looked at him. "It's strange, isn't it?" she said. Daniel glanced up. "What is?" Margaret gestured gently around the quiet house. "All these years we were busy raising Ethan. Now it's just us again." Daniel nodded. "Yeah, it's different." Margaret studied his face for a moment before speaking again. "Do you ever feel like we forgot how to be just us?" The question lingered in the air. Daniel felt the familiar pressure in his chest, the same pressure he had carried for decades. He knew Margaret wasn't accusing him of anything. She was simply searching for an answer to a feeling she couldn't quite name. But Daniel couldn't give her the answer she deserved. Because the truth was complicated. They hadn't stopped loving each other overnight. There had been no dramatic fight, no sudden betrayal that shattered it happened. They had lived side by side for years, sharing responsibilities, raising a child, building a stable life. Yet beneath that stability, the silence had slowly replaced the kind of openness that once connected them. Daniel realized this more clearly with every passing year. He could see it in the way Margaret sometimes looked at him across the room, as if trying to understand a puzzle missing a few pieces. He could hear it in the pauses between their conversations. Love had not disappeared completely, but it had changed shape, becoming quieter, more distant, almost like a memory of what it used to be. Daniel glanced around the dinner table now in the present moment, returning to the conversation with Ethan and Rachel listening silently. Margaret was still watching him, her expression thoughtful but calm. Daniel spoke slowly, choosing each word with care. "We didn't fall out of love overnight," he said. "But over the years something important faded away." He paused briefly before continuing. "We kept living together. We kept building appeared, because of a truth I never had the courage to share." He looked directly at Margaret then, his voice softer than before. "And that's why tonight I finally have to tell you what really happened 25 years ago."